My name is Serena Calloway, and I need you to stop what you're doing for the next few minutes. Because what I'm about to tell you is the kind of story people spend their whole lives either running from or pretending never happened. 5 years ago, my sister cheated me out of the man I was about to marry, at my own engagement dinner, in a restaurant full of the people who were supposed to love me. And the most shocking part? My parents watched it happen and said absolutely nothing. I couldn't believe it. The two people who were supposed to be my foundation chose silence, and in that silence, I learned the most brutal truth I have ever had to face. Sometimes the people sitting at your table are the ones holding the knife. Here's what nobody tells you about that kind of family betrayal. It doesn't just hurt, it rewrites you. The infidelity, the backstabbing, the way I was humiliated and shamed in the one moment that was supposed to be mine, all of it stripped away something I thought I'd always have. My sense of safety, my sense of self-worth. The belief that the people carrying your blood carry your best interests too. I walked out of that restaurant lied to, gutted, and completely alone. And I made a decision right there on the pavement, dress still perfect, heels still on. I was never going to let anyone do that to me again. Not because I was bitter, because I was done. What happened next, over the next 5 years, is not the revenge story you think it is. Yes, there's karma. Yes, there's a jaw-dropping reversal of power in a ballroom full of Portland's most influential people. Yes, my sister's composure cracked in a way I will never forget. But the real revelation in this story isn't about her at all. It's about what gets revealed when you stop auditioning for the approval of people who never deserved the front row. The truth of who you really are. The dignity that was always yours, waiting underneath everything they tried to take. And the extraordinary, quiet power of a woman who rebuilt herself in the dark, then walked back into the light on her own terms. Last Saturday night, I walked into the Hargrove Estate Gala on the arm of my husband, a man my sister had never met, a man whose name was about to transform the evening. And I watched 5 years of silence finally, beautifully, irrevocably speak. What happened next left my sister standing in the middle of a ballroom holding a champagne glass she forgot to drink from. This is the story of what justice actually looks like when it doesn't announce itself. This is the story of how I went from shamed to untouchable. And this is the story of the moment I realized the victory was never about her. It was about me. Sit down, because this one is going to stay with you. My name is Serena Calloway, and Portland was 3,000 miles from that table, and even further from their version of me. From the East Coast, it might as well have been another planet. It was supposed to be the most beautiful night of my life. The restaurant was booked months in advance. The candles were lit. The champagne was cold, and everyone I loved was sitting around that table. I was wearing the dress I'd dreamed about since I was a little girl. I was happy, genuinely, completely, foolishly happy. And then I saw it. I couldn't believe what was right in front of my eyes. My sister Mara, laughing a little too loud, touching his arm a little too long, leaning in a little too close to my fiancé, Cole. At first I told myself it was nothing. I mean, she was my sister. She was family. You don't go there with family. But the truth doesn't wait for you to be ready. It just lands, hard and cold, like a slap you never saw coming. Cole looked at her the way he used to look at me. That's what broke something inside me. Not just the betrayal itself, but the way it was so visible, so unashamed, so completely out in the open. And nobody at that table said a word. Not a single word. My parents sat there, eyes low, like they were waiting for a storm to pass. And I was the storm they didn't want to deal with. I was humiliated in a room full of the people who were supposed to protect me. By the end of that night, Cole left with her. 3 weeks later, they were official. Whatever happened to them after that isn't the point. What happened to me is, I felt shamed in a way I can't fully describe even now. It's like being erased in real time. Your dignity stripped away while people watch and choose to look elsewhere. lied to, backstabbed, made to feel small in the one moment that was mine. But here's the thing nobody talks about. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do in a moment of public humiliation is nothing. No tears, no screaming, no dramatic exit speech. Just silence with your chin up. So I picked up my clutch. I smoothed my dress. I looked at the table, at my parents, at Mara, at Cole, and I said nothing, not a single word. Because in that moment, I understood something that would take me years to fully realize. The loudest statement you can make is the one that leaves them wondering what you knew that they didn't. I walked out of that restaurant, and the night air hit my face like a reminder that I was still here, still breathing, still standing. What happened next? Even I couldn't have scripted it if I'd tried. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. I sat on the edge of my bed for maybe 3 minutes, and I made a decision that would quietly change everything. I wasn't going to fight. I wasn't going to call Mara and beg for an explanation. I wasn't going to sit across from my parents at some staged family dinner while everyone pretended the night before was some kind of misunderstanding. No, I was done with all of it. I was done performing closeness with people who had already chosen their side. I pulled one suitcase from the top of my closet. One. Not because I was rushed, but because I was deliberate. There's a kind of family betrayal that doesn't just break your heart, it teaches you to travel light. I took what mattered, my documents, my laptop, 3 months of savings, and a determination so sharp it felt almost physical. Everything else, the pictures on the wall, the shared memories, the version of myself that still needed their approval, I left behind. I didn't say goodbye. No letter, no phone call, no dramatic moment at the door. I simply disappeared into the city like someone who had finally stopped explaining herself. And let me tell you, there's a specific kind of freedom that comes with cutting contact with people who watched you get backstabbed and stayed quiet. My parents never called. They'd always preferred the easier daughter, the one who didn't ask hard questions, the one who didn't make scenes. In families like mine, love isn't distributed equally. It's allocated. Keeping Mara stable had always been their priority. Scandal to them was worse than betrayal. I found a small apartment on the 4th floor of a building that smelled like old coffee and new beginnings. It was nothing, barely enough room for my suitcase and a mattress on the floor. But it was mine. My name on the lease, my rules, my silence. After years of being the daughter who tried too hard, the fiancé who planned too much, the sister who gave too freely, I was finally just me, nameless to the city, unknown. And somehow, for the first time in a long time, I felt safe. Some people thought I ran, some probably still do. But there's a difference between running and removing yourself strategically. One is panic, the other is power. I wasn't escaping my life. I was choosing for the very first time to build one completely on my own terms. I changed my number. I closed the door. And I never looked back. Not even once. What I didn't know yet was how that silence would eventually become my loudest weapon. I won't romanticize it. Those first months were brutal. There were nights I ate cereal for dinner because I was too tired to cook and too proud to ask anyone for help. There were mornings I sat at my desk at 5 a.m. studying for a certification that felt impossibly out of reach, wondering if I'd made the biggest mistake of my life. The self-worth I thought I had? It had to be rebuilt from zero. Not borrowed, not performed. Actually earned, piece by piece, decision by decision. I signed up for every course I could afford. Finance, contract negotiation, public speaking, strategic communications. I worked during the day and studied at night until my eyes burned and my brain refused to form another sentence. People talk about glow-ups like they're glamorous, like there's a montage moment where everything clicks and suddenly you're transformed. But real reinvention? It's unglamorous. It's repetitive. It's choosing discipline over self-pity on the days when self-pity would have been so much easier. And slowly, something shifted. By year 3, I was leading regional acquisitions for one of Portland's fastest-growing real estate firms, then headhunted. Then I negotiated my first 8-figure contract and watched the room go quiet in a way it never had before. I became someone I genuinely respected. Not because I was trying to prove anything to Mara or to my parents, but because reclaiming your own dignity after it's been stolen has a specific kind of hunger to it. I worked like I had something to win back, because I did. 5 years of that kind of discipline changes you in ways that are hard to explain to people who haven't lived it. You stop needing validation. You stop flinching when someone looks at you a certain way. You stop shrinking to fit into spaces that were never meant to hold you. I became sharper, more strategic, and completely, thoroughly unreachable by the people who'd once made me feel small. The karma wasn't something I planned. It was something I became. By year 5, I had a corner office, a wardrobe that spoke before I opened my mouth, and a reputation in my industry that opened doors I'd once only dreamed about. From the outside, people saw a woman who had it together. But I knew the truth. I wasn't just successful. I was free. And that freedom had a name, and a shape, and a feeling I never wanted to let go of. What I hadn't expected was that the next chapter of my story wouldn't begin alone. The charity gala in downtown Portland wasn't even on my calendar. My colleague forwarded the invitation last minute, said it'd be good for networking, and honestly, I almost didn't go. I threw on a navy dress, told myself I'd stay an hour, and walked into a room full of Portland's most influential voices, architects, venture capitalists, nonprofit founders, all in one carefully lit ballroom. I was there for work. That's all it was supposed to be. And then I heard him before I saw him. A voice in the crowd, calm, measured, the kind of voice that doesn't need to raise itself to be heard. I turned around, and there he was. Elliot Hail, tall, still, watching the room the way someone watches a chessboard, not impatiently but with complete intention. He wasn't the loudest person there, but he was, without question, the most present. There was something about him that felt like the opposite of everything I'd once settled for. We started talking about a development project. Then we talked about ethics in investment. Then we were still talking 2 hours later, and my coat was in my hand because I'd forgotten to leave. He was sharp without being arrogant, observant without being intrusive. And he asked questions that nobody had ever bothered to ask me before. Not about my accomplishments, but about how I thought. Like my mind was the most interesting thing in the room. I hadn't felt that in a very long time. Later, he told me he'd almost canceled that evening, that he'd been quietly rebuilding after a partnership had collapsed and nearly taken everything he'd built with it. That honesty undid me a little. Over the months that followed, our professional collaboration grew into something neither of us had arranged. There was no rush, no performance, no trying to be impressive, just 2 people who showed up consistently and honestly, and found that trust, when it's real, builds fast. He never once made me feel like I was too much, or not enough. He just made me feel like I was exactly who I was supposed to be. And that, after everything, after the infidelity, the betrayal, the family drama that had carved through my 20s, was something I didn't take lightly. We got married on a Wednesday morning in a small ceremony in the Cascade foothills, just close friends, good light, and the kind of quiet joy that doesn't need an audience. No grand announcement, no family drama, no performance, just a promise made between 2 people who had both been through enough to understand what real looks like. Elliot didn't save me. I want to be clear about that. But he saw me. And sometimes that's the most revolutionary thing another person can do. What neither of us knew yet was that the universe had a much bigger stage in mind for what we'd built. It arrived on a Tuesday. A crisp, cream-colored envelope with my family's estate address embossed in the corner. The kind of stationery designed to communicate importance before you even open it. I stood at my kitchen counter holding it for a long moment, the morning light cutting across the marble, and I felt something I hadn't expected. Nothing. No fear, no anger, no residual ache. Just a kind of calm clarity that told me I had traveled further from that restaurant table than I'd realized. It was an invitation to the Calloway Family Charity Gala, their annual event, the one my parents used to parade us through as children, all pressed dresses and perfect smiles. The one that always made the society pages. 5 years of silence from them, and now this. No phone call, no apology. Just an invitation, like the last 5 years were a season that had simply passed. I couldn't believe they thought this was enough, but honestly, I wasn't even surprised. Here's what I knew that they didn't. I wasn't the same woman who had walked out of that engagement dinner. I wasn't the daughter who swallowed her pain to keep the peace. I wasn't the sister who had quietly loved someone who was calculating how to take everything she had. That version of me was gone, and in her place was someone they hadn't met yet, someone they were completely unprepared for. I could have thrown it away. A year before, maybe even 6 months before, I might have. But something in me had shifted, not toward revenge exactly, more toward completion. There was a chapter that hadn't been properly closed, not for their benefit, for mine. Justice, I'd learned, doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it just shows up, composed and dressed well, and lets reality do all the heavy lifting. I RSVP'd yes. I told Elliot over dinner, and he looked at me for a long second, steady, unhurried, and said, "Then let's make it count." I didn't need his permission, but having his certainty beside mine felt like a full house versus a bluff. Whatever awaited us in that ballroom, I knew one thing. I was arriving on my own terms this time. And those terms were going to be very different from anything they were expecting. The night of the gala, I took my time getting ready. Not out of vanity, but out of intention. I chose a deep emerald gown, clean lines, minimal jewelry. Nothing that screamed for attention. Everything that commanded it. When you've spent 5 years building yourself from the ground up, you learn that real confidence doesn't need decoration. It just needs you to walk into a room and mean it. I looked in the mirror, and for the first time in a very long time, I didn't see the woman who was once humiliated in a candlelit restaurant. I saw someone I'd worked incredibly hard to become. The Calloway Gala was hosted that year at the Hargrove Estate, rented for one night, dripping with old money. I arrived alone, before Elliot by design. He had a separate donor entrance scheduled with the press team, so I walked through the front doors first. I felt the shift immediately. A few heads turned, a few whispers rippled. Some people recognized me from the industry. Others were simply trying to place me, and I let them wonder. That, too, was part of the design. My parents saw me from across the room. I watched the recognition move across my mother's face like weather, surprise, calculation, a tight smile. My father gave me a measured nod. No warmth, no apology. Just the performance they'd always been most comfortable with. I smiled back, genuinely, without teeth, because I didn't need anything from them anymore. I was not there to reconcile. I was there to witness. The difference was everything, and then the energy in the room changed. I didn't need to see him to know. I felt it the way you feel a shift in pressure before a storm. The room turned, almost as a single body toward the entrance. Elliot walked in, and I watched Portland's most powerful people straighten unconsciously, not because of his suit, though it was exceptional, not because of his height, though it helped, but because Elliot Hail had been the anonymous major benefactor funding the entire event, and the organizers had just made that announcement. The name that had built this evening from behind the curtain had just stepped into the light. The applause started before anyone had made a formal introduction. I watched Mara, standing near the champagne table with a glass in her hand, begin moving toward him automatically, the way pretty, calculating people move toward the most powerful thing in a room. She hadn't seen me yet. She had no idea what was already unfolding. And I stood there, completely still, watching the chessboard arrange itself exactly as it needed to. The next 60 seconds were going to be the most quietly devastating of Mara's entire social life. Elliot didn't need the spotlight, but when it found him, he held it with a kind of gravity that made the entire room want to lean in. He was introduced briefly by the gala's director as the lead benefactor whose contribution had made the evening's central initiative possible, a youth arts and education program that would serve over 400 families across 3 Oregon counties. Not abstract philanthropy, specific, deliberate impact. The room understood the difference, and so did the press photographers who had quietly repositioned themselves. He spoke for maybe 4 minutes. No notes, no performance, just clear language, direct eye contact, and the kind of conviction that only comes from someone who actually believes what they're saying. He talked about what it meant to invest in communities that were still being overlooked, and how real power reveals itself not in accumulation, but in what you choose to build. The room was completely still. I stood near the edge of it, watching not him. I'd seen him speak before, but watching the room's reaction to him. You can learn everything about a room by what it goes quiet for. The applause when he finished was immediate and full-throated. Not polite gala clapping. Real applause. Donors leaned toward their table mates. Journalists were already pulling out business cards. The event's most prominent patrons, people whose names were on hospital wings and university endowments, were making their way toward him with the unhurried but deliberate movement of people who recognize someone worth knowing. I saw 2 photographers swap lenses and aim at us before we even moved. Elliot had, in 4 minutes, become the most important person in the building, and nobody had seen it coming. Except me. I had seen it every Wednesday morning, every late night at the dining table with spreadsheets and a cold cup of coffee, every conversation where he chose people over optics and long-term impact over short-term recognition. This wasn't a performance. This was just Elliot, and the payback, if you could call it that, was watching the world finally catch up to what I'd known for years. I hadn't needed anyone to validate my choice, but standing in that room watching it all click into place? I won't pretend that wasn't deeply, quietly satisfying. From the corner of my eye, I could see Mara still moving toward him through the crowd, her smile bright and practiced, completely unaware that the ground was already shifting beneath her heels. She looked stunning. She always did. That was never the question. The question was always what she'd do with it. And tonight, what she was about to do was walk directly into the most shocking moment of her carefully curated life. I didn't move. I didn't have to. The truth has a way of organizing itself, if you're patient enough to let it. Mara reached him just before I did, which was exactly as intended. I watched her slide into the conversation with the practiced ease of someone who's been using her appearance as a door key her entire life. Her hand went to his forearm. Her laugh landed right on cue. Elliot, to his complete credit, was gracious and warm, because that's who he is, and she had no reason yet to read anything as unusual. I stood maybe 10 feet away, a glass of sparkling water in my hand, and I waited. Then she glanced to the side, just a quick social scan of the room, and her eyes found mine. I watched it happen in real time. Recognition, confusion, recalibration. That particular sequence of expressions a face makes when it meets someone it never expected to see here, looking like this, standing this close to the man she'd just been working so hard to impress. I smiled at her, the same way you smile at someone when you know something they don't, and you're in absolutely no rush to tell them. She recovered quickly. I'll give her that. She always was fast on her feet. But there was a tightness around her eyes now, a micro-calculation running behind her smile that hadn't been there 30 seconds ago. She looked back at Elliot, then back at me, and I could see her trying to assemble a story that made sense. Why is Serena here? Why is she standing like she belongs? Why is she not surprised? Every question landed on her face before she had the chance to suppress it. The infidelity, The backstabbing, the years of my cheated trust, all of it was hanging in the air between us without a single word being spoken. And then Elliot, completely naturally, turned toward me, extended his hand, and said, "There's my wife." 3 words. No drama, no ceremony, just fact. The way you'd state a fact that has never once required your defense. Mara's composure didn't collapse. It evaporated. The color pulled from her face so quickly I almost felt something for her. Almost. But the truth was that this moment, as shocking as it clearly was for her, was never something I'd planned for her benefit. It was simply what happened when karma finally caught up to itself. She stood there, glass in hand, smile frozen at half-mast, processing a humiliation that no amount of social grace was going to smooth over. Not tonight. Not in this room. Not in front of these people. I noticed one of the evening's lead sponsors glance over, read the silence between us, and quietly turn away. The kind of social dismissal that cuts deeper than any confrontation. The family drama she had authored 5 years ago had just returned the manuscript, and her name was still on the cover. I looked at her. Really looked. And I felt none of the things I thought I would feel. No triumph, no venom, no old hunger for vengeance. Just the quiet, settled weight of a woman who had already moved on. I stepped forward. Not aggressively, not theatrically, just forward. The way you step into a space that's already yours. I stood beside Elliot, and for a moment the 3 of us occupied the kind of silence that has more weight than most conversations. Mara was searching my face for something. Anger, maybe, or gloating. Something she could work with. Something she could respond to. But I gave her nothing to grab onto. Because I didn't have anything like that left for her. It had all been spent years ago, on the floor of that small apartment, in the silence of 5 a.m. study sessions, in the long work of reclaiming a self that she and her choices had tried so hard to diminish. "Mara," I said. My voice was steady and warm, in the same way marble is warm, composed, not cold. "I don't think you've met my husband." That was all. No backstory. No accounting. No years of lied-to nights and cheated mornings laid out for the room to inspect. Just a statement of present reality, delivered so calmly that any dramatic response from her would have read as unhinged by comparison. And she knew it. I could see her knowing it. That's the thing about a power reversal without spectacle. It doesn't leave the other person anywhere to go. She said something polite. I don't even remember what. Her words were fully formed but completely hollow, like a building with no foundation. Elliot was gracious, as always. A few people nearby had noticed the exchange, not because anything scandalous had happened, but because something unspoken had, and people who move in rooms like this one are trained to sense exactly that. No shouting, no confrontation, no revenge speech, just dignity, standing quietly in the room where it had once been stripped away. There's a payback in that no script could improve on. The dignified justice of it was never in what I said. It was in what I didn't say. 5 years ago, I was the woman who walked out of a restaurant without a word because she couldn't trust herself to speak. Tonight, I was the woman who walked into a ballroom without needing to say much at all because her silence wasn't grief anymore. It was authority. That difference, thin as it sounds, is the distance between being a victim and being untouchable. I had crossed that distance one disciplined day at a time. Mara excused herself a few minutes later. I watched her move through the crowd toward the far side of the room, her posture slightly altered. Not broken, but recalibrated. She was already processing what had happened, already building a version of it she could live with. And that was fine. She could have whatever story helped her sleep. The truth didn't need her to carry it. The truth was already standing in an emerald dress in the center of the room, nursing a glass of sparkling water and feeling, for the first time in years, completely whole. What happened next wasn't something I planned. But it was, perhaps, the most important moment of the entire evening. I slipped out to the balcony around 9:30. Not because I was overwhelmed, but because I needed a moment of quiet to feel what was actually happening inside me. The Portland skyline stretched out below, all lit windows and bridge lights reflected in the Willamette River, and I stood there with my arms against the railing and I just breathed. No performance, no audience, no role to play. Just me, the cold night air, and the extraordinary strange piece of a chapter that was finally, fully closing. I thought about the girl who had walked out of a restaurant 5 years ago. Shoes on the pavement, dress still perfect, dignity intact by sheer force of will. I thought about the apartment with the mattress on the floor, the cereal dinners, the certifications, the corner office, the Wednesday morning ceremony in the Cascade foothills. I thought about every single decision I had made in the dark, when nobody was watching and nobody was clapping, and how each one had been a brick in something I hadn't fully understood I was building. A life. My life. One that belonged to no one else and owed nothing to anyone who had tried to take it from me. The real revelation, the one that hit me there on that balcony, quietly and without ceremony, was that the victory was never about Mara's face in that moment. It was never about seeing her shaken, or the room turning, or Elliot's name changing the air. Those things happened, but they were incidental. The actual triumph was something much quieter. It was the fact that I had walked into that building tonight without needing anything from anyone inside it. Not validation, not recognition, not the apology my parents had never offered. I had come as a whole person, and that was the thing Mara could never have taken from me, even if she'd tried. Self-worth, I understood now, isn't something someone gives you. It isn't something you get back when your sister goes pale, or when the room applauds your husband, or when karma finally shows its hand. It's the thing you build in the silence, in the early mornings, the hard decisions, the moments you choose dignity over spectacle. I had spent 5 years constructing mine, brick by quiet brick, and standing on that balcony I realized it was the one thing in my entire life that was completely, unambiguously mine. No one had funded it. No one had co-signed it. It was entirely the product of me. The betrayal had happened. The infidelity had been real. The family drama had carved through my 20s like a wound. But here, on this balcony, none of it had power over me anymore. Not because I'd forgotten, but because I had outgrown it. That's the thing about justice that nobody tells you. The most profound form of it isn't watching someone suffer. It's discovering that their actions no longer define your story. And somewhere behind me, through the glass doors, a room full of Portland's finest was completely unaware that the most important moment of the evening hadn't happened inside. It had happened out here, in the cold, with no audience at all. We left the gala at 10:15. Not because we had to, because we chose to. There's a difference, and I've learned to treasure it. Elliot found me on the balcony, took one look at my face, and didn't ask a single question. He just offered his arm, and I took it, and we walked back through those double doors, through the room, past the champagne tables and the society photographers and the people who would be dissecting the evening for weeks. We didn't rush. We didn't perform. We just left, the way people leave when they have somewhere better to be. I didn't look for Mara on the way out. I didn't look for my parents. There was no parting glance, no final statement, no need to ensure that anyone had clocked our exit. That impulse, the one that wants to be witnessed in your triumph, was something I'd shed somewhere between the balcony and the coat check. The vengeance, if it ever existed in any pure form, had dissolved into something much quieter and more permanent. This wasn't a payback moment. It was a closing moment. And closing moments don't need an audience. The night air outside the Hargrove Estate was cold and clean, and I stood on those stone steps for just a second before we walked to the car. I let myself feel it, the full, complete, unambiguous sensation of a door shutting behind me. Not slamming, just closing, the way a door closes when the person leaving it has made up their mind completely and has no intention of returning. 5 years of distance, one evening of reappearance, And then this. A hand in mine, a car waiting at the curb, and an entire life ahead that asked nothing of the people I'd left behind. There were no fireworks, no dramatic revelation, no moment where someone said the right words that made everything make sense. But I had stopped needing those things a long time ago. And that, I think, is what genuine healing actually looks like. Not the grand gesture, not the confrontation scene, just the quiet certainty of a woman who has fully reclaimed her own story and no longer needs to read anyone else's version of it. Reclaiming yourself, I'd learned, isn't loud. It's the most private revolution there is. We drove home through Portland, bridge lights, rain-slicked streets, Elliot's hand on the gear shift, and I watched the city move past the window and felt, for the first time in perhaps my entire adult life, that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Not because anything had been fixed, not because anyone had apologized, but because I was finally, completely, irreversibly free. And freedom, real freedom, doesn't need a celebration. It just needs you to keep driving. People always ask me, when they hear pieces of the story, wasn't it satisfying, seeing her face like that? And I understand the question. I really do. Because for a long time, I thought that was what I wanted too. I thought the victory would arrive in a visible moment, in someone else's humiliation, in a room full of witnesses, in the precise second that justice made itself undeniable. I thought it would feel like winning. But the truth is so much stranger and so much better than that. The real victory wasn't the moment Mara went pale. I need you to understand that. It wasn't the applause or the emerald dress or the way the room turned when Elliot walked in. Those things were real. And yes, a part of me felt the weight of them. But they were never the point. The point was something I almost missed entirely, standing on that balcony with the wind off the river and the city below me, when I realized that I had stopped, at some point I couldn't even pinpoint, needing any of this to define me. That is the transformation nobody talks about when they talk about revenge. The betrayal happened. The backstabbing was real. I was cheated out of a relationship, lied to by the people who were supposed to be my foundation, shamed in the one moment that was supposed to be beautiful. All of that is true, and also true. I built something out of it that no one could take apart. Not Mara, not my parents, not any version of the past that still wanted to tell me who I was. The karma wasn't the party. The karma was me, standing in my own life, unbroken. I think about that woman a lot, the one in the restaurant picking up her clutch, smoothing her dress, choosing silence. I think about what she couldn't have known in that moment, that the most shocking thing about her story wouldn't be the betrayal. It would be what she built in its aftermath. That she would stand on a balcony 5 years later in an emerald dress and feel, not triumph over someone else's failure, but something far more rare, completion. A self that was entirely her own, dignity that had been tested and had held. By morning, the society pages had already named him and printed my last name beside his. If there's a lesson here, and I'm not sure stories like mine are supposed to have clean ones, it's this. The people who betray you are rarely the authors of your downfall. More often, they're the ones who, without knowing it, made room for the version of you that was always waiting to exist. Mara didn't destroy me. She just stopped being in the way. And that made all the difference. The real triumph isn't the moment your sister goes pale. It's the moment you realize you no longer needed her to. So here we are, at the end of a story that I used to think was about a dinner, a stolen fiancé, and a sister who lied. But it isn't, is it? It never was. It was always a story about what happens to you after the worst moment of your life, about who you choose to become when the people you trusted choose someone else, about whether the justice you're looking for is the kind that happens to them, or the kind that happens to you. I chose the second one. And I would choose it again, every single time. But now I want to hear from you. Because I know, that some of you watching this have sat at a table that felt like mine. Some of you have been lied to by someone who shared your blood. Some of you have walked out of a room where your dignity was traded for someone else's comfort, and you've spent years either trying to forget it or trying to figure out what to do with it. I want to know, what did you do with yours? Did you confront them? Did you disappear? Did you rebuild? Or are you still in the middle of it right now? Drop it in the comments. Tell me your story. The real one, not the version you tell people when you want them to think you're fine. Because this community is not a place for surface-level conversations. If this video touched something in you, something about family betrayal, about self-worth, about the long, unglamorous work of reclaiming your dignity after someone tried to take it, I want to know. Your story might be the story someone else needs to hear tonight. Don't keep it to yourself. And if you want to keep receiving the kind of content that actually goes there, that doesn't just scratch the surface but digs into the complicated, human, messy truths underneath, then subscribe to this channel and hit the bell icon right now, because we are not done, not even close. There are more stories like this one coming. Stories about the choices we make when we've been broken, the silence that is sometimes the most powerful weapon, and the moment every person deserves, the moment they finally, completely become themselves. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and I'll see you in the next chapter.